forward to this. Okay. We just want to welcome Ximon Kittok who's the executive director of the Grand Rapids Trans Foundation to the GRIID blog, and so I appreciate you taking some time out today to speak with us, Ximon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So I'm just wondering, maybe by way of starting off, since I don't know how much people who read the GRIID blog are familiar with the work you all do, but could you give us a little bit of a history and maybe talk a little bit about the work that you're currently involved in?
Absolutely. So we've been around for about 10 years. I'm one of the co-founders and I'm the current executive director. We started off as a very small volunteer-run grassroots organization that was uh, just trying to do academic scholarships for the local trans and non-binary community. Uh, there's a lot of really negative statistics around systemic and institutionalized discrimination, which kind of feeds into housing concerns, education, and a number of other sort of disparities. So we thought by maybe getting people to a higher level of education, we could try to stymie some of those kind of negative um, things around the community. So uh, we started there, but we've sort of been on this slow and steady growth since then. We have expanded past academic scholarships into also helping the local trans and non-binary community access legal name changes, updating all of their legal documents with updated name and gender marker. We provide guidance, paperwork assistance, and full financial assistance for folks. We have a gender affirming items closet where we can buy brand new things for folks every month. We have a trans vetted resource guide so folks can find trans affirming providers, barbers, tattoo artists, anything you can think of. And those are all vetted by local trans people. So less self select and more the trans community really kind of leading the way as far as what places are safe in the community. We just started a transportation assistance program that uh, helps folks with monthly recurring unlimited bus fare and Uber rides for select appointments. And we also have a social group for trans folks. Grand Rapids Pride Center, which is a different organization, has a number of support groups for the trans community, but we really saw a need for the trans community to have spaces just to make friends, find community, be a little less isolated. So we have our local tea time group, which the event kind of varies here and there, but it allows folks to meet other people in the community and feel a little less alone. So I would say those are broad strokes what we do, but we do a lot of interaction with other folks in the community, other organizations in the community as well.
Great. Well, thank you for that excellent overview, and also for the amazing work that you're doing. It's an incredible resource that this community certainly needs. Um,
Thank you.
Next question would just be is that it's been a few weeks since the Trump administration issued their executive orders that are fundamentally anti-trans orders. I'm just wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what this kind of means for the work you do at the Trans Foundation, but also just what it means for the trans community in general that lives in the greater Grand Rapids area.
Yeah, I think we are all kind of waiting to see what it means. I think it's pretty obvious that a number of these executive orders are outright illegal, and there's been a bunch of litigation that has been trying to pause some of the things. As far as how they will actually play out in the end, I think we're kind of just waiting to see. Um, Obviously, they are uh, cruel, inhumane, unscientific. Um, and I think they're creating a lot of additional fear and anxiety in the community, uh, understandably. where folks are a little bit concerned about their legal documentation, about their ability to access life-saving, gender-affirming care, um, whether their livelihoods are at risk. Um, I think I think we know some things about how these are playing out, and I think a lot of other things we are not as certain about. So, for example, we do know that federal documents like passports and updating social security cards, they have basically the executive order that laid out that there are quote unquote only two sexes, really erases a lot of intersex identities as well as trans folks, including non-binary trans folks who are outside of the scope of sort of the binary male-female. So we are seeing a lot of we're seeing that updating those documents are becoming more difficult and not possible. So updating gender marker on federal documents currently uh, is a problem. And unfortunately, sometimes the healthcare that you can access is tied to the gender marker that you have at the Social Security Administration. So it's it's unfortunate that we've gotten to this point where folks can't have um, accurate documentation because we know statistically that folks that show up and their identification is not accurate with the gender that they are presenting as, with maybe not even a name that maybe it flags some incongruence, that those people are much more statistically likely to be discriminated against, harassed, denied service, and even physically assaulted. So,
Mm.
uh, and we've been doing our best to try to get people accurate documentation for the last few years, and we had a big push because we were a little concerned that something like this would happen. But I think there's a lot of people who still have, incorrect documentation. And then, yeah, as far as gender affirming care, I'm sure that some of your readers have been following what's been going on with um, Corewell Health, one of the biggest health providers in the state, with our basically they sort of had some anticipatory uh, um, what's the phrase? What is that? Basically, they heard the executive order and they didn't wait to see how it would play out. They said, "Okay, we'll just pause our gender affirming care for youth." It's important to realize that, like most medical care, it's best if it's between you and your doctor. Having the government step in to dictate what is best for you or your child is a dangerous overreach. So Corewell did actually um, pull back and pause service, and AG Dana Nessel basically said this is in violation of the state's Civil Rights Act, which includes sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. So Corewell at that point was like, "Okay, we'll come back." But I do worry that it's created a distrust with
Yeah.
the health providers that we have here in the state, that folks might not be able to regain. Those health providers might not be able to regain the trust of the community, honestly.
Yeah.
So. There are definitely other executive orders as well, which I'm happy to talk about, but I think those are the two big ones that we've sort of been
Yeah.
keeping tabs on. So,
Okay. Um, Not surprising, the state legislature has also introduced some sort of similar legislation at the state level that the Trump administration has put in place. Yet those are yet to be voted on. But I'm just wondering if the GR Trans Foundation is connected to like a network of other organizations in the state, or if there's some kind of a coalition or whatever. I'm just wondering around, some coordination around trying to address these policies at the state level. Is that,
Absolutely.
can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Uh, I will say that in the last few years, it's become obvious that a lot of the work that we're doing is a lot of putting band-aids on wounds. Whereas some of these things can be fixed at the state level. So the last few years, we have actually engaged in a little bit more advocacy. One piece of good news, before we talk about the bad news, I would love to just say that there is a piece of good news at the state level, which is a piece of legislation that Grand Rapids Trans Foundation and a number of other organizations in the state have been advocating for around updates to our name change process in Michigan. Currently, the process is extensive time frame, complicated, confusing. It's very expensive, and it also forces trans people to out themselves in a public newspaper, essentially, as well as engage with law enforcement unnecessarily. The current name change process is sort of coming from this place of like uh, assuming fraud that anyone's trying to change the name is potentially doing it for fraudulent purposes. Obviously, we know that trans folks, that's the farthest from the truth. They're just trying to find something that affirms who they are, that matches better, that feels better. So we've been fighting to simplify and modernize this process. And it did actually, in this past year, pass both houses and get signed into law. So April 1st, we will be seeing some new name change processes that will be much safer, more accessible, cheaper, easier for the trans community in particular, but also the Michigan community at large, anyone who's seeking to change their name for whatever reason. So um, that was sort of our foray, our first foray into advocacy. And yeah, since then there's definitely been a coalition that has been built. Every queer and trans nonprofit in the state has a bi-monthly call. So we do have a coalition across all of the centers across the state. And I think that's really important for making sure that we can move as one, speak as one, push things hard as one. Um, I will say right now, the organizations that have sort of taken the lead are Equality Michigan and ACLU of Michigan. They have got a really good pulse on what's happening, both nationally but more specifically at the state, and ways that the other organizations can kind of come together to push back when needed. So I will say that there's a couple of coalitions that have been built that have really been trying to leverage the power of the organizations and the communities that they serve. So
Okay. Yeah. Um, well, maybe next question is sort of beyond getting past what these executive orders, what proposed legislation might look like. I mean, what does all this really mean? And how does this sort of concretely impact people in the trans and binary communities? Uh, this kind of, as you rightly named, these cruel uh, executive orders. I mean, what's that going to look like just for people in their daily lives?
yeah, we can't speak to that super concretely, but I can make some educated predictions. And I think I think the fact that trans folks, which make up less than 1% of the population, have become such a scapegoat for all of the country's problems. And because of sort of the increased visibility of trans life, trans existence, trans people in the uh, throughout all media, um, we are legitimately worried that there could be upticks in discrimination, harassment, violence. Trans community is statistically uh, much more likely to be victims of violence, despite what some of these like right wing narratives around um, the danger of trans people, statistically speaking, that has almost never happened, and trans people are much more likely to be the victims of hate-based crimes. Um, so we are concerned about that, and I think just kind of more broad, I think this being the center of attention and so much misinformation, disinformation that's been pushed specifically by this administration. Um, I mean, just look at the executive order around limiting gender affirming care for youth. If you read that, it is hateful. It is disinformation. It's straight up lying about what gender affirming care looks like. And it's limiting care, life-saving care for youth. And I think the trans community already has a much higher rate of depression, of suicidality, and these things are directly tied to larger cultural uh, yeah, pushes. I think the reason why we see such high rates is because there is so much hate and so much discrimination, and we're concerned that we are going to see kind of an uptick in some of these things. I think the way that we are hoping to kind of push back against that is to create spaces where folks can access friends, community, um, kind of unplug with other like-minded folks for a while because I think the weight of the time we're living in is really going to weigh heavily on a lot of us. And I can honestly say for myself as a genderqueer non-binary person, it definitely has for me as well. And I think the way we get through this is together through community building, through coalition building, and uh, um, yeah, it's a hard time we're living in, and we are going to do our best, and we are still here. We're not going anywhere. We're here to support and celebrate the local trans community and um, help folks get the things they need, even if it's harder for them to get it and for us to get it for them. We're going to be doing our best to um, get resources to the people who need them. So I sort of think I lost the train of thought. Was there anything else that you wanted to
No,
touch on with that
no,
question? Okay.
that much appreciated. I know that none of this
Yeah.
is easy to talk about, so um, maybe as the last question, which is I think sort of builds on what you just said, is just for people who are what I identify as allies or accomplices,
Mm.
depending on how you want to view this sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
What kind of things if again, if it's something that is welcomed, um, what can people be doing to support both the work of the Grand Rapids Trans Foundation, but also just try to fight, join the fight against, anti-trans policies that are, seemingly being normalized, at least at the federal level.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think, like I mentioned before, trans community is under 1% of the population. It is going to be vital um, for cisgender folks to stand up and help us fight some of these things. I I think that this can range from I think there's a wide range of things that cisgender allies and accomplices can do to help support the cause. I think on the interpersonal end of things, if you don't know a trans person, meet a trans person. Uh, Honor trans people's names and pronouns. If that is hard for you, practice. Practice with others, cisgender people, so that you're not accidentally wounding the people that you come into contact with. So, I think there is interpersonal work that you can do with hearing people's stories, honoring their identities, and making sure that folks feel supported and seen. Um, Obviously, there's organizations like ours, Grand Rapids Trans Foundation, that is doing a lot of work pushing resources out into the community. I will also say there's some other nonprofits in the area that are also doing really good work. The Grand Rapids Pride Center, the Grand Rapids or the LGBTQ Healthcare Consortium. Obviously, the work we're doing is really vital, but I think that I would like to encourage people even more than that to get engaged in mutual aid efforts. I think there's going to be a lot of extra need in the community that isn't something that necessarily any of our organizations are going to be able to help directly with. So we're talking folks on the um, right on the cusp of getting evicted from their housing, folks that need help accessing gender affirming surgeries, a lot of things, even food support. A lot of these things are things that we can help with to a certain extent, but um, rallying the community to really engage and offer life-changing assistance during this time of really it's going to be a time of survival for a lot of folks, is going to be the most impactful, and it's going to get you engaged in the community in a way that donating to one of our organizations is not. So like to offer both, but I think mutual aid is going to be huge right now. Um, I think uh, joining, offering your voice towards legislators is going to be huge. I think we are not seeing enough political courage from our legislators, those folks who are there to represent us. And I think we can push back a lot harder. I think they need to hear from us. They're doing some stuff, but they are not doing enough. And then uh, I guess just getting getting looped in somewhere, local organizing of some sort, protesting that has real tangible results, um, mutual aid efforts, um, and I think maybe there's space for you also if you work for a company that is feeling sort of pressured to adopt anti-trans policies or roll back some of the protections that they have. Um, being a voice, an advocate in those spaces as well. I would like to remind just anyone listening right now that ELCRA, the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act in Michigan, does protect folks based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, meaning that if you think that you are being discriminated against, if your rights are being taken away, uh, if you are not being offered services because of these identities that you hold, that is against the law in the state of Michigan, and you should contact the ACLU of Michigan if you believe that that has happened. So, uh, I think we need to just make sure that we are fighting for folks who have less ability to fight for themselves. And I know that's not just the trans community right now. Obviously, there's a lot of communities being attacked and targeted right now. I do think that there is definite space for us to not be one issue um, advocates, accomplices. I think that there is a definite space for coalition building because a lot of these things are directly tied together around liberties, around bodily autonomy. So just get involved somewhere. It's not up to you to be involved in every single space you can be, but find some space that you feel comfortable and you have energy to invest and invest it. We need to make sure that folks aren't sticking their heads in the sand. Uh, we can push back effectively if we organize. So I think those are my main thoughts.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today and for your words and for your role at the Grand Rapids Trans Foundation. So just really appreciate everything you're doing and hopefully people will get motivated and get involved in whatever struggles that they feel comfortable in, but this one is certainly an important one. So I thank you again for your time, Simon.
Yeah, thank you for having me and thanks for the work you're doing. And Yeah, hope to see some of you out there on the front lines. So.
Great.